I'm so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hey there, friends. Welcome to the 105th episode of the new and improved Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. And I hope you guys have your hand sanitizer ready because this episode is about anthrax. Ew. And you know, this whole rabbit hole, it all started with a bill, a very simple bill. It was easy to read. It was simple to understand. It was only 6 pages. And the bill I'm talking about is H.R. 1300, the First Responder Anthrax Preparedness Act, which passed the House of Representatives 424-0 on July 29th. This bill amends the Homeland Security Act of 2002 to create a program for distributing anthrax vaccines, which are about to expire, to domestic emergency responders who volunteer to accept them. The vaccines would be distributed through a 2-year pilot program based in at least 2 states. Part of this pilot program would be an ad campaign informing people of their opportunity to receive the almost expired vaccines, and would also include educational materials telling our emergency responders about the risks of taking the vaccine. So reading this bill, I immediately thought of one of my best friends. He's a firefighter and a 2-time Iraq War veteran. And he's perfectly fine with putting himself in harm's way to save someone else's life. Quite frankly, he's a better person than I am. Because the thought of taking some expiring vaccine for anthrax of all things and jamming it in my arm? Nope! Never in a million years. But my friend, I think he'd actually do it, especially if he believed that it would give him the ability to save his family, friends, and neighbors in the case of an anthrax attack. And he's already an emergency responder, so he's already qualified for the pilot program, a pilot program that would be targeting people exactly like him. Good people who care more for others than themselves, who don't often question the motives of their government. So saving people in dangerous situations, that's his thing. But researching, that's my thing. And so I asked the question, what vaccine do they want to offer to my friend to put in his arm? And could it hurt him? Because my red flag in regards to this bill is the part that says that our first responders would be receiving expiring anthrax vaccines. That tells me that we have some stockpile somewhere of an anthrax vaccine, it's going bad, and in order to get a return on our investment, we need to put that vaccine into some arms. Otherwise, the expiring part wouldn't be there. And so the question was, what vaccine is expiring and is it safe to put it in my friend's arm? And perhaps most importantly, why do we need vaccinated anthrax first responders within the United States? Well, welcome to the rabbit hole. So, it turned out that finding the answer to what vaccine was actually pretty easy to find because there's only one company that has ever had the contract to provide the U.S. government with an anthrax vaccine. You see, the anthrax vaccine used to be produced by a U.S. government-owned facility in Michigan until it was privatized in 1998. The company that bought our anthrax vaccine production facility was owned by a man named Fouad El-Hibri, a German entrepreneur who had made his fortune selling an anthrax vaccine for a British company until that company was sold. El-Hibri and his father wanted to buy the American government's anthrax vaccine production facility, but wisely thought that there might be some pushback from Americans if their government were to sell such an important government function to foreigners. And their solution to this problem was brilliant. They straight up gave a piece of their new company, called Bioport Corporation, to Admiral William Crowe. Admiral Crowe had been appointed by President Bill Clinton to serve as ambassador to England from 1994 to 1997, which is how he met El-Hibri and his father as they were making a killing selling anthrax vaccines in England during that time. Admiral Crowe, a Republican, had endorsed Bill Clinton, a Democrat, for president, pissing off a lot of people in his political party but making other powerful friends at the same time. Those new friendships may have paid off because when the United States privatized their anthrax vaccine production, Bioport Corporation, headed by Admiral Crowe and his foreign friends, won the bid for $24 million, even though a lower bid for $16.6 million was also submitted. Shortly after the anthrax vaccine production was privatized, Defense Secretary William Cohen announced a plan to require all 2.4 million U.S. soldiers and reservists to be vaccinated against anthrax. This was controversial to say the least because after the first Gulf War, about 20% of American and British soldiers got sick with what was known as Gulf War syndrome, which was a disease that varied from person to person, but often included memory loss and chronic fatigue. The disease has been linked by many to the anthrax vaccine, which was given to American and British soldiers who served in the first Gulf War. Some of the evidence suggesting a connection includes the fact that American and British soldiers who received the vaccine but who never actually went to the Gulf got sick with Gulf War syndrome, while French soldiers who served in the war but were never given the vaccine never came down with the disease. Regardless of the effect on the soldiers, this announcement that all 2.4 million of them would be forced to take the anthrax vaccine, this meant big money was on the way for Bioport Corporation, the only company with an anthrax vaccine contract with the Defense Department. According to still-serving Congressman Walter Jones, who I trust on this type of stuff, the Pentagon paid Bioport Corporation almost $150 million between 1998 and 2001 as part of their exclusive contract for the anthrax vaccine. There was only one problem with this cushy arrangement, which is that Bioport Corporation couldn't get their shit together. The facility Bioport had purchased from the government needed to be renovated, and they didn't want to renovate it. And as a result, the vaccines that Bioport was producing there were often different from one dose to the next. Contaminants were also found in their vaccines, and then the company's record keeping was a big ol' mess. And so due to these issues, amongst others, the FDA suspended Bioport's vaccine shipments for quality control reasons. For 3 years, Bioport couldn't get its product licensed, and the Pentagon continued to pay the company for vaccines it was not collecting. In fact, in a 1999 bailout plan, the Pentagon agreed to more than double the price it would pay Bioport for each vaccine it was producing and stockpiling. This bailout happened after Bioport threatened to stop producing vaccines entirely, one of the many troublesome effects of allowing any one company to control something we need. In the year 2000, the Pentagon finally told Bioport Corporation to quit making the vaccine until they got their license back, but kept paying the company in order to keep Bioport afloat. During this time, the Pentagon paid Bioport $126 million for unlicensed vaccines destined for storage and an additional $33.5 million for old vaccines. Old vaccines produced when the facility was still government-owned and legally licensed by the FDA. The old vaccines were then injected into the arms of 525,000 of our soldiers. But then in August of 2001, after Bioport Corporation still couldn't get its act together, Congress and the Pentagon publicly stated that they were considering giving up on Bioport Corporation. They had had enough of paying a company for an unsafe vaccine that the government couldn't use. But then, 1 month later, the anthrax attacks happened. In the anthrax attacks, 5 innocent people were killed and 17 others were hospitalized. And one of the things about the anthrax attacks that's often forgotten, I had forgotten this, was that the letters were all dated 9/11/01. The letters then went on to say, quote, "This is next. Take penicillin now. Death to America. Death to Israel. Allah is great," unquote. Whoever mailed those letters wanted people to think that they were part of the September 11th attacks, like anthrax was the next phase, coming to kill us all through the mail. People panicked. The anthrax fear was real. And so, in miraculous timing for Bioport Corporation, whose only contract had been threatened for elimination by their only customer, the U.S. government, just a month before the attacks, Bioport Corporation suddenly had their vaccines licensed by the FDA in February 2002, even though their quality standards demanded by the FDA were still only, quote, 70% on the way there, unquote. According to an article written by Laura Rosen for Salon in October of 2001, quote, "Political pressure due to the terrorism scare is playing more of a role than quality control in expediting FDA approval," unquote. But that didn't matter. They got their license back, and by September of 2003, the Pentagon was paying Bioport Corporation $22 per dose, which is way up from the $4.36 originally negotiated when the vaccines were being produced by the U.S. government itself. Things got even sweeter for the company in July of 2004 when President Bush signed the Project BioShield Act into law, which dedicated $700 million to buy 29 million doses of the anthrax vaccine from Bioport Corporation, which now had a new name, Emergent Biosolutions. In just 3 years, Bioport Corporation, which is now Emergent Biosolutions, went from near extinction and government bailouts to being one of the most successful pharmaceutical corporations in the world. But here's the thing. Even though the company is profitable and those profits are siphoned off and divvied out to private investors, this company is still a government-funded company. In their annual report to investors in 2014, this is what Emergent Biosolutions itself says about the source of all of its money. Quote, "In the past, we have derived substantially all of our product revenues from our biodefense division from sales to the U.S. government, specifically to Health and Human Services, including BARDA and the Centers for Disease Control and the Department of Defense. We expect that this will be the case for the foreseeable future." Unquote. And exactly how much money are they taking from the U.S. government? Well, in 2014, $267 million out of Emergent's $278.3 million in sales were to our government. That's 96% of their business, $267 million of taxpayer money. And their existing contract with the U.S. government is to supply 44.75 million doses of their anthrax vaccine for the Strategic National Stockpile over a 5-year period ending in September 2016. That's enough anthrax vaccine to put in the arms of about 1 out of every 7 Americans. Is that really necessary? Because here's the thing, this is a vaccine, so we would be having to take this ahead of time for it to be effective. This isn't a treatment for 1 out of 7 Americans. So it's not like, oh, here's a anthrax attack and we can go to the Strategic National Stockpile and get this stuff and then we'll be cured. No, that stuff is called Cipro. It's an antibiotic. This is a vaccine. Who is getting vaccinated for anthrax? Why do we need 44.75 million doses of this? I honestly don't know. But there you go. The question has been answered. What vaccine would they be sticking in my friend's arm if HR 1300 becomes law? Well, it's the Emergent Biosolutions vaccine. The vaccine that has a shelf life of 4 years that we have been buying a metric ton of ever since the 2001 anthrax attacks. The vaccine that was, quote, 70% on the way there, unquote, safety-wise when licensed under political pressure after the 2001 anthrax attacks. The vaccine that is manufactured by the same company in the same facility that created the vaccines that likely caused the Gulf War syndrome. I don't love that. But Emergent Biosolutions does. In fact, Emergent Biosolutions lobbied for this particular bill at least 11 times during the 113th Congress. And it turns out HR 1300 is the second try for this particular bill. In September of 2014, at the end of the 113th Congress, Representative Pete King of New York introduced a very similar bill, but it died in committee. Now he's trying again with HR 1300, which has already passed the House without a single person voting no. And there's another bill, HR 3583, the Prepare Act, that is waiting for a vote in the House that includes the text of HR 1300. It's one of those bill packages, just in case HR 1300 doesn't become law on its own. This tells me that Emergent Biosolutions' lobbying efforts are working, and I'm not surprised because they're not messing around. For the last election, Emergent Biosolutions gave out $429,600 directly to candidates, super PACs, and the Republican Party, and then they spent an additional $3,720,000 lobbying Congress on bills that would affect their business. 25 out of their 35 paid lobbyists used to have government jobs, and they even hired one former congressman, Jim Saxton, who represented New Jersey's 3rd District until he retired from Congress after the 2008 election. And remember, Emergent Biosolutions makes almost all of its money from the government, meaning almost all of its money is our tax money. And since buying our government's anthrax vaccine production facility in 1998, Emergent Biosolutions has spent $29,883,000 of our tax money lobbying our government. They also spent an additional $1,595,780 of our tax money legally bribing our congressman. When you hear me express anger over privatization of government services, this is a big reason why. It's still our money, but this is where it's going now. And now, other companies have noticed how Bioport Solutions / Emergent Biosolutions leveraged its monopoly over the anthrax vaccine to become wildly profitable on the government's dime. And there are lots of other companies getting in on the game. Since the 2001 anthrax attacks, the Department of Health and Human Services has spent more than $15 $16 billion on biodefense research and countermeasure development. A lot of that for a second-generation anthrax vaccine, even though the cure for anthrax is well known. It's an antibiotic. It's called Cipro. It's manufactured by Bayer, and it's the most common cure for anthrax inhalation. And it works pretty damn well when anthrax is diagnosed in time. In 2001, 22 people were infected with anthrax. 5 did not survive. But that's a 77% survival rate, and for at least the first victim, he might have had a chance had anthrax been suspected. The first anthrax letters were mailed from a mailbox outside of Princeton University in New Jersey on September 18, 2001. These letters were mailed to Tom Brokaw and the New York Post, both located in New York City. The FBI also suspects that a letter which was never recovered was also sent to American media, the producers of the National Enquirer in Florida, because on October 5, 2001, Robert Stevens, a 63-year-old photo editor, died from inhaling anthrax after spending 3 days undiagnosed in a West Palm Beach hospital. At the time, no one suspected anthrax, and for good reason. There were only 18 reported cases of inhalation anthrax in the entire 20th century in the United States, and most of those cases were from farm workers who had been exposed to animals with naturally occurring anthrax. But after the death of Robert Stevens, when the offices of American media in Boca Raton, where Robert Stevens worked, tested positive for anthrax, it became clear that this was not an act of nature. 4 days after his death, on October 9, 2001, 2 more letters were mailed from the same mailbox outside of Princeton University in New Jersey. This time, the letters contained an even deadlier strain of anthrax and were sent to 2 senators, Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle of South Dakota and Chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee Patrick Leahy of Vermont, both of them Democrats. 6 days later, on October 15th, a staffer in Senator Tom Daschle's office opened his anthrax-laced letter, and more than 24 people in his office would test positive for anthrax. All of them survived. 4 days later, on October 19th, the letter sent to the New York Post in the first round of mailings was discovered unopened in New York City. 4 days after that, Joseph Kersine and Thomas Morris, 2 post office workers from the Brentwood Postal Facility in Washington, D.C., died of anthrax inhalation from the letters that were sent to the Democratic Senate leaders. The day after these 2 deaths, on October 23rd, in the middle of this slow-motion terrorist attack, which was thought to be an ongoing part of September 11th due to the content of the letters, the House of Representatives passed the Patriot Act, and the Senate passed it the next day. Most members of Congress did not have time to read it, and 2 days later, on October 26, 2001, the Patriot Act was law. 5 days later, on Halloween, Kathy Newen, an employee at a Manhattan hospital, became the 4th person to die from anthrax inhalation. Over 2 weeks later, on November 16th, the letter sent to Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont was found in a quarantine pile of mail. And 5 days later, the 5th and final victim, 94-year-old Ottilie Lundgren of Connecticut, is killed by anthrax spores attached to her mail. The attack is finally over, but the effects of the anthrax attacks have only just begun. Over the next decade and a half, the United States would spend billions of dollars stockpiling old and developing new anthrax vaccines, and 2.2 million soldiers would have the vaccine injected into their bloodstreams. But of course, we can't forget that the 2001 anthrax attacks were also used as a justification to attack Iraq. On October 17, 2001, just 2 days after the letter sent to Senator Daschle was opened, the Wall Street Journal ran an article by its editorial board which concluded that because the anthrax in Daschle's letter was a sophisticated kind that had to be professionally produced, because it was, the editorial board concluded that, quote, by far the likeliest supplier is Saddam Hussein, unquote. In the same issue of the Wall Street Journal, former director of Central Intelligence James Woolsey laid out a case for attacking Iraq, even if the proof was not there. The next day, the Washington Post got into the game by arguing that the lesson of the anthrax attacks was that it didn't matter if Saddam was behind it, but we should bomb him because we've gotten a taste of what biological weapons could do. The New York Times followed suit by running an article by Richard Butler, an Australian diplomat who led the UN inspectors in Iraq in the 1990s, in which he said that Iraq was also his prime suspect. And this continued in the media for years, leading right up to this unforgettable moment when Secretary of State Colin Powell made the case for war at the United Nations on February 5th, 2003.
When Iraq finally admitted having these weapons in 1995, the quantities were vast. Less than a teaspoon of dry anthrax, a little bit about this amount. This is just about the amount of a teaspoon. Less than a teaspoonful of dry anthrax in an envelope shut down the United States Senate in the fall of 2001. Iraq declared 8,500 liters of anthrax But UNSCOM estimates that Saddam Hussein could have produced 25,000 liters. If concentrated into this dry form, this amount would be enough to fill tens upon tens of thousands of teaspoons. And Saddam Hussein has not verifiably accounted for even 1 teaspoonful of this deadly material.
But as most of us know, it turned out that Iraq had nothing to do with the anthrax attacks of 2001, even though the attacks were used as a justification for the war. Instead, after a 7-year-long investigation, the FBI concluded that the attacks were the work of one man, a lone wolf, U.S. military scientist Bruce Ivins. The case is officially closed. There's no one investigating this anymore. The FBI and the Justice Department released a 92-page fascinating read in February 2010, which concluded, quote, "The late Dr. Bruce Ivins acted alone in planning and executing the attacks," unquote. No wiggle room. He did it. Case literally closed. But I, for one, don't think it should be. Because you see, figuring out what's fact in the anthrax attack story is really tricky. The investigation centered upon a substance, anthrax, that is only truly understood by a few people, a few scientists. You see, anthrax occurs in nature. It's a bacteria, but it's most commonly found on farm animals. But outside of nature, it can also be grown in petri dishes in labs. It's a living thing. It's a bacteria. You just need a little, and it can grow. The way that it's spread is through contact or through consumption of infected meat. But when someone touches, eats, or breathes in anthrax bacteria, if it's live, it can grow rapidly and it can kill its host. How rude! So what's kind of cool about the anthrax bacteria is that it has genetics that can tell us where it came from. So kind of like how our DNA is a mixture of our moms and our dads, anthrax can be traced back through its genes too. And this genetic map is how we know for a fact what kind of anthrax was used in the letters in 2001. The following clip is of Alice Gast. After the FBI and the Justice Department declared case closed on Bruce Ivins, a panel of scientists analyzed the accuracy of the government's science. Alice Gast was the chairman of that investigative committee, the National Research Council's Anthrax Letter Investigation Committee. And this is what she said while presenting a list of conclusions at a press conference about their findings.
The B. anthracis in the letters was the Ames strain and was not genetically engineered.
That right there is the most definitive thing we know about the anthrax attacks from 2001. The only true fact about the anthrax used in the 2 attacks. We know it was the Ames strain. And we knew it right away. The FBI announced it in October of 2001, in the middle of the anthrax attacks themselves. And this revelation, this fact, is how we know and how we could have known the whole time with better journalists that the anthrax attacks had nothing to do with Iraq. On October 24th, 2001, just a week after all of those Blame Iraq articles were published by big media, and years before Secretary of State Colin Powell bullshitted the world at the United Nations, an article published by Deborah Mackenzie in The New Scientist, which is a magazine in the UK, confirmed that the Ames strain is, quote, the one the United States used when it produced anthrax weapons, a program which ended in 1969. To be identified as Ames in the studies currently underway, the anthrax must either be the American military strain or one that's very similar, unquote. In other words, it's not the same kind that was produced by Saddam Hussein in Iraq. The only thing that I can tell you is 100% fact is that the anthrax in both of the 2001 attacks originated from somewhere within the United States military. That's a fact. From there, facts get fuzzy. So after identifying all of the anthrax used in the attacks as Ames strain, the investigation eventually ended up focusing on the anthrax from one particular flask in an office at US AMRID, which stands for the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. In our DNA analogy, if the Ames strain is the grandparent level of the anthrax, the FBI concluded that the anthrax in flask number RMR 1029, remember that name, RMR 1029 was the parent. This flask, RMR 1029, belonged to an anthrax vaccine researcher, one of the most respected and well-known in the world, a researcher named Bruce Ivins. This is Attorney General Robert Mueller testifying about the anthrax investigation to the Senate Judiciary Committee in September of 2008, right after they closed the case.
The key disclosure in the investigation came when we were able to identify and match the genetic markers from the anthrax mailings to the anthrax that was contained in a flask RMR 1029 that was maintained by Dr. Ivins, and that came in the spring of 2005. And at that time, it triggered a number of investigative steps and put investigative steps in a new light, given the fact that we'd identified the anthrax in the mailings with that particular flask maintained by Dr. Ivins. So it was at that juncture that I would say the investigation took on a new focus.
So matching the anthrax from the letters to the anthrax in Bruce Ivins' office, the anthrax labeled RMR 1029, this was the key reason that Bruce Ivins was a suspect. In their summary, on page 32 to be exact, the FBI said clear as day, quote, RMR 1029 is the source of the murder weapon, unquote. They even underlined that sentence. But the scientists that evaluated the science used by the FBI to make these conclusions, well, this is what they had to say about that. Here's Alice Gass, the chairman of the investigation into the FBI science.
The scientific link between the letter material and the flask number RMR 1029 is not as conclusive as stated in the DOJ investigative summary.
Uh-oh. And just in case that wasn't clear,
the committee's primary finding is it is not possible to reach a definitive conclusion about the origins of the B. anthracis in the mailings based on the scientific evidence alone.
so was the anthrax in the letters a child of RMR 1029, the anthrax from Bruce Ivins' flask? Maybe, but maybe not. The scientists discovered 4 distinct genetic mutations in the anthrax used in the letters. When they tested all the anthrax they collected from labs around the country, these were the results. This is David Riemann, the number 2 guy on the National Research Council's Anthrax Letter Investigation Committee.
From the repository, there were a total of 8 samples that tested positive for all 4 of these genetic mutations. 7 of those 8 were said to have come from flask RMR 1029 at USAMRIID. The 8th sample was located at Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, a collaborator of workers at USAMRIID. And we were told that the FBI had clear evidence that that sample, that 8th sample, had itself come from USAMRIID and from 1029. So there were 8 out of the complete repository that had the full set of 4 positive results.
So it seems that the anthrax from RMR 1029 was involved. There's good reason to think that. But one of the samples that matched came from a completely different location. Bruce Ivins was at USAMRIID, but a matching sample of his anthrax was turned in by Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio, which is a contractor, a nonprofit private contractor. And that means that while the anthrax may have originated in Bruce Ivins' flask, it didn't stay there. It was shared with other locations. And now, knowing that, the plot thickens further when you recall that there were 2 different kinds of anthrax used in the 2 separate anthrax attacks. There was one kind of anthrax used in the September 18th attack on the media, and there was a stronger anthrax used in the October 9th attack on the senators. Which, by the way, the fact that these were 2 separate attacks is something that I don't think was emphasized clearly at all by big media. I didn't really know that until now. But anyway, here is what the scientists who evaluated the FBI's work said about the 2 different kinds of anthrax. The journalist asking the question was Bob Orr, and the scientist who responds is once again Alice Gass, the chairman of the National Research Council's Anthrax Letter Investigation Committee.
The report goes on to say how the letters to the Post and to Brokaw were different than the letters to Leahy and to Daschle. With those differences in mind, and I know one of the differences is the amount of silicon that was found, does that preclude all of them being made by the same person or coming from the same batch? Can you talk a little bit about how they can be different? What accounts for the differences? And does this mean it had to come from different sources?
Those differences indicate 2 main things. One is that they were separate batches. They have enough physical and chemical differences between the 2 sets of letters that they must have come from 2 separate batches. Also, the differences between those letters and the flask RMR 1029 indicate that there had to be an additional growth step from RMR 1029 in order to create letters with the characteristics that they found.
So, basically, we don't know if the anthrax came from Bruce Ivins' flask. And the exact anthrax used was changed between the first attack and the second. You know, to hear this discussed anytime by the media, they talk about the anthrax used. But there were two! And no one ever explained where the second batch came from. And it definitely doesn't look good that it was found in two different locations, a time zone away from each other. This science about the anthrax that was found on Bruce Ivins' desk in the flask, RMR 1029, this being the murder weapon, this science, which was obviously kind of a mess, this science was the strongest part of the FBI's case. And from there, the rest of the evidence against him was pretty problematic. For instance, one of the stronger pieces of evidence was the FBI's assertion that Bruce Ivins spent a lot of time in his lab alone late at night during the nights preceding both anthrax attacks. The FBI said that this was strange behavior for Bruce Ivins. But a joint investigation by PBS's Frontline, ProPublica, and McClatchy, all serious journalism organizations, they found a serious problem with the FBI's evidence. The following clip is from Frontline's excellent episode on the Anthrax Attacks called the Anthrax Files. All of the people who are not the narrator in this clip are employees who knew Bruce Ivins at US AMRID. And the last voice, the woman, is Claire Fraser Legit. I don't know how to say her name. It's Claire, the FBI's own genetics consultant.
In fact, Frontline, ProPublica, and McClatchy newspapers have taken a close look at Ivins' lab work records. The FBI chart was based on the night hours in only one lab. But our research shows it was not unusual for Ivins to work late at the other labs and offices throughout the Army complex. And during those days the FBI found suspicious, Ivins was, in fact, conducting a number of time-sensitive experiments in the lab.
He was in the middle of a very important vaccine test experiment. He had a series of animals that had been vaccinated, and so he was in there checking his animals.
And many of Ivins' colleagues say that even that many hours in the lab wouldn't have given him enough time to produce the anthrax.
The FBI insinuated that Bruce did this in a week in the laboratory at nights, and we all knew that was in fact reasonable. It wasn't practical, and given the limitations of the laboratory, just wasn't possible in that time frame.
Ivins' colleagues also insist it would have been impossible for him to produce the powder unnoticed.
People notice things that are unusual in the suites. They find out what's going on. Somebody would ask him, Bruce, what experiment's going on? What are you doing here? Your life depends on questions like that. And so it's just he couldn't have, in my opinion, known that he would not be observed.
And the FBI did not find any physical evidence, spores or remnants of anthrax DNA, on the equipment they believe Ivins used to make the powder.
I would find it surprising that you could take a piece of equipment in which you had grown any bacterial organism, whether it be anthrax or anything else, and get it completely clean where there was no trace. Now, does that mean it's impossible? No, but the amount of time and effort that would likely need to be put into making that happen would be enormous.
Also cited as evidence by the FBI was the fact that Bruce Ivins cleaned his office without authorization. Yet he left the so-called murder weapon on the shelf for 4 years, just waiting to be discovered. Why would he do that? And then speaking of that murder weapon, when the FBI did their initial tests of anthrax samples from all over the country, Ivins submitted 2 samples of RMR 1029. One of them matched the anthrax in the letters. One of them didn't. The FBI said that the fact that the second one didn't match was evidence that Bruce Ivins tried to deceive them. But then why would he turn in one that was a match? Why wouldn't he turn in 2 fakes? And then the rest of the evidence pretty much boils down to, he was weird. Bruce Ivins cross-dressed and had an obsession with a certain sorority. He wrote weird emails expressing self-doubt and insecurities to people he considered friends, which the FBI used to say he was mentally ill, as if that makes you a terrorist. The FBI even said that Bruce Ivins used alternate identities when mailing things, but their examples included the fact that he mailed a friend a soccer jersey under the return address Mia Hamm, and that he mailed another friend some Yankee stuff under the name Derek Jeter. Did the FBI not get the joke? The FBI actually used that as evidence. And some of the most concerning evidence is the stuff that simply wasn't there, or worse, not even looked for. Bruce Ivins lived in Maryland, and there was no evidence that he ever drove to Princeton University in New Jersey where the letters were mailed. Forget about driving there twice. Also, the letters themselves, which were written by hand, were never compared to Bruce Ivins' handwriting by any expert. Instead, the FBI's report sourced an unnamed witness who said the writing looked like Ivins' writing. There was no evidence whatsoever, also, that he had any kind of beef with either Tom Brokaw, Tom Daschle, or Patrick Leahy, the specific targets of the letters. And most damning, the FBI searched everything Bruce Ivins owned, his home, his cars, his daughter's home, but didn't find a single spore of anthrax, not in his house or in his car or on any of his equipment. This is also from Frontline's The Anthrax Files episode.
To the FBI's own science consultant, it raises serious doubts.
The fact that no spores were found, the smoking guns that you would have expected to see if he had been the perpetrator weren't there. That's an aspect of the investigation that I think represents a big hole and really gives me pause to think about, how strong was this case against Dr. Ivins?
But Bruce Ivins couldn't stand the pressure of the investigation, which involved officers tearing apart his home, the FBI following him on a day-to-day basis, the FBI questioning everyone he knew about his most embarrassing secrets, which led to isolation from all of his family members and his friends. He started drinking really heavily and was deeply depressed. And on July 29, 2008, Bruce Ivins committed suicide by overdosing on Tylenol PM. An interesting and especially painful choice for a man accused of manufacturing bioweapons. After his death, any chance he had of defending himself was gone, and the FBI declared Bruce Ivins the lone wolf, and the case was closed. But before they officially closed the case, there was one bit of business the FBI had to take care of, which was that they had to officially clear Stephen Hatfield. Because you see, Bruce Ivins was the second person that the FBI was convinced was the anthrax killer. Another U.S. AMRID scientist named Stephen Hatfield was the first. You see, almost immediately after the anthrax attacks, irresponsible journalists such as Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times placed blame for the attacks on Stephen Hatfield. In a joint FBI big media witch hunt that would make Nancy Grace proud, they went after this guy, declaring him guilty via public opinion, even airing the raid on his house live on television. The Attorney General at the time, John Ashcroft, went on television more than once and told the world that Stephen Hatfield was a, quote, person of interest, unquote. The attention ruined Hatfield's life. He was fired from his job at U.S. AMRID, and the Justice Department prevented him from getting hired at a university. His daughter's name and address were published on the internet, leading to harassment of innocent members of his family. And through all of this, the FBI couldn't find any actual evidence. Just like with Bruce Ivins, there were no spores anywhere to be found. But here's the difference between Stephen Hatfield and Bruce Ivins. Where Bruce Ivins developed a drinking habit and severe depression in response to the FBI investigation, Stephen Hatfield, he fought back. In a move the FBI didn't see coming, Stephen Hatfield called a press conference on August 25th, 2002, and said this.
Today, I again appear before the TV cameras. I want to look my fellow Americans directly in the eye and declare to them, I am not the anthrax killer. I know nothing about the anthrax attacks. I had absolutely nothing to do with this terrible crime.
And Hatfield didn't stop there. He went on to describe what he believed was happening to him. He went on to explain why he was the target of the investigation and what he believed it meant to be a person of interest to the FBI.
My lawyers can find no legal definition for a person of interest. I, however, have a working definition. A person of interest is someone who comes into being when the government is under intense political pressure to solve a crime, but can't do so, either because the crime is too difficult to solve or because the authorities are proceeding in what can mildly be called a wrong-headed manner. It then becomes necessary for the FBI and other authorities to produce a warm body. But since there's no suspect, and the authorities have nothing on which to base a prosecution, they pick a serviceable target. This should preferentially be a person about whom mysterious questions can be raised, someone with an interesting or colorful background. Then they give him a prejudicial label, person of interest. and they leak appropriate rumor and innuendo to the press. Then they sit back and watch an uncharged and presumptively innocent person be picked apart by journalists looking for hot stories. It soon becomes inconsequential that the stories have no bearing on the crime at issue. What is useful is that the FBI can be seen to be on the job. The press is hot on the trail and the public is satisfied, as Mr. Ashcroft continues to say without any explanation, that progress in the anthrax letter attacks is being made.
And almost to prove his point, how did the FBI react to Hatfield's press conference? Well, 2 weeks later, on the one-year anniversary of September 11th, the FBI brought dogs to Hatfield's apartment, which they had already thoroughly searched and where no anthrax spores had been found. These dogs led the FBI to a lake near Hatfield's home, and when brought to the lake by the dogs, the FBI claimed that there must be an underwater lab in that lake, and so they f***ing drained it. You want to know what they found? A box with a hole in the side of it, which turned out to be a turtle trap. That's how desperately the FBI wanted to find something to prove Hatfield's guilt. They drained a friggin' lake. But fast forward to 2008, right after Bruce Ivins made the FBI's case easy by offing himself, the FBI finally cleared Stephen Hatfield of the crime. On top of that, Stephen Hatfield also won a $5.8 million settlement with the government that had wrongly accused him in court. But you know what's really crazy about the FBI having tried to pin this whole thing on a now proven to be innocent man? In trying to collect evidence on Stephen Hatfield, the FBI turned to none other than Bruce Ivins for help understanding what kind of anthrax they were dealing with. The reason was that Bruce Ivins had worked at U.S. AMRID since 1981, and according to Wired magazine, many of the anthrax researchers on the planet relied on the anthrax that Ivins designed for their own research, which explains how the anthrax from his flask could end up at Battelle Memorial Institute in Ohio, because it turns out that U.S. military scientists ship anthrax to each other all the time. According to the FBI's own documents, between 1997 and 2001, the anthrax from the killer flask was transferred to at least 2 other labs, and on top of that, there were 14 other withdrawals whose destination was never recorded. So basically, even if the anthrax used was born in Ivins' flask, that doesn't mean that the child of it used in the letters was grown by Ivins at U.S. AMRID. It could have been grown by anyone with a sample of it. And remember, one of the 8 matching samples came from Battelle Memorial Institute, the contractor in Ohio. Now, this practice of shipping anthrax to other labs and not recording it may sound irresponsible, and that's because it fucking is. But get a load what's happening today with anthrax in the good old U.S. military. This is the opening of a hearing from July 2015, just a couple months ago. This is Representative Diana DeGette of Colorado.
Now, Mr. Chairman, as you said, frankly, the details of the Dugway incident do not inspire confidence. We're talking about a long-term series of inadvertent shipments of live anthrax from the Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, which is supposedly one of the most sophisticated facilities in the world. This incident only came to light in May because a private company contacted CDC after discovering what it thought was inactivated anthrax was actually live anthrax. Since then, we've learned that 86 laboratories in 20 states and the District of Columbia and 7 foreign countries received live anthrax spores from Dugway over the last 12 years. Those labs then transferred the live spores to an additional 106 labs. So we're talking about almost 200 labs in all 50 states accidentally receiving live anthrax for over a decade. Miraculously, nobody seems to have fallen ill as a result of this series of incidents. Still, like you, Mr. Chairman, I'm concerned that this activity was going on for so long before one lab finally raised questions that spurred the department to action.
And Diana DeGette continued with a very reasonable question.
How do we have 200 separate labs all across the country working with anthrax? Do we need to have 200 labs working with anthrax? Or is it possible that we could limit the number of labs and therefore limit the risk while still being able to do this important research?
Yeah. Why do we need to have anthrax being shipped to every state and a bunch of other countries? What the hell is going on here? Well, here's Dr. Marcia Cross. No, not Bree from Desperate Housewives, but Dr. Marcia Cross, the Director of Healthcare at the Government Accountability Office.
We think it's important that there be a more comprehensive set of plans for how many labs are needed. You know, there have been there's been a great increase in the number of labs over the last decade. Since the anthrax attacks in 2001, a number of different federal agencies have expanded the number of labs that they have. Academic institutions have built labs. Some states have built labs. And a lot of private entities have built labs. And they're very expensive. We don't know what really is needed. They, as we've heard today, they are developing their own validation procedures, and there's not necessarily an assurance of consistency. And so while inspections can be performed of these laboratories, the kinds of reportings of problems have only typically been going to a level above the laboratory, so they're not going up to the top of departments or to organizations. And so I think that we're concerned that there hasn't been kind of a consistent set of standards in place, a consistent understanding of what the needs are, a consistent plan developed for where these laboratories ought to be built and maintained, and what the costs are going to be over the long term for maintaining this kind of infrastructure, and whether it is in line with the needs.
Yes, since the anthrax attacks of 2001, there has been a huge expansion in the amount of money dedicated to developing and stockpiling anthrax vaccines, which was a goddamn miracle for Emergent Biosolutions, the only licensed anthrax vaccine producer in the United States that almost got shut down by its only customer, the United States government, in August 2001, just a month before the anthrax attacks miraculously saved its business and turned it into one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world. How lucky indeed. What an amazing coincidence. But Emergent Biosolutions is not the only anthrax vaccine profiteer anymore. There's all kinds of government cheese going towards research into a new anthrax vaccine. A vaccine, you guys. Vaccines are something that you need to take before an attack for it to be effective. And none of us are taking it, so what are we paying all this money for? And even if they were offered to the public, knowing what I do about how the current vaccine was developed, and especially how it was licensed, there's no way in hell I'd put that in my arm. Especially considering that the risk of contracting anthrax is incredibly low, and the cure for anthrax exposure is a highly effective course of antibiotics. The most well-known is Cipro. You want to prepare for an anthrax attack? Let's stockpile Cipro in every CVS and Walgreens in the country and call it a day. But that's not the plan. Preparation doesn't mean an easily available cure for the public in case of an attack. No, preparation is an excuse to dump billions of dollars of tax money into private pharmaceutical company research into a new vaccine that nobody wants to take. But this is what they're doing, and to develop a vaccine, you need anthrax to test it on. So the military sends anthrax everywhere to almost 200 labs, including labs outside of the country, and whoopsie, that anthrax was live. You know, Bruce Ivins was a vaccine researcher. That's why he had RMR 1029. So even if we were going to believe the bullshit story published by the FBI, proper preparation for next time would have been a far more secure system for tracking the anthrax that vaccine researchers can get their hands on. And while we're at it, speaking of Bruce Ivins' flask of anthrax, I made one more uncomfortable connection about the research into anthrax vaccines. On September 4th, 2001, 1 week before 9/11, the New York Times published an article about a secret Clinton/Bush program to genetically enhance anthrax to, in theory, test the vaccine given to U.S. soldiers, to test the vaccine produced by Emergent Biosolutions. The laboratory selected to create the genetically altered anthrax was Battelle Memorial Institute, the military contractor in Ohio, and the only other lab aside from U.S. AMRID that had the strain of RMR 1029 that matched the anthrax found in the letters. From the article from September 4th, 2001, it said, quote, several officials who served in senior posts in the Clinton administration acknowledged that the secretive efforts were so poorly coordinated that even the White House was unaware of their full scope, unquote. And based on the whoopsie shipments of live anthrax to almost 200 labs in every state, it doesn't appear that coordination of our anthrax supplies has gotten any safer. In fact, it looks like it's gotten worse. So here's what I can conclude from all this, and I apologize, but it isn't much. Number 1, we do not know who put the anthrax in the attack letters in either the first or second attacks, and just as concerning, we don't know why. The official explanation, the FBI's case, I'm sorry, but I just have to say it, it's bullshit. We know that the FBI really wanted Stephen Hatfield to be the guy, but he was proven innocent. And then the second investigation into the FBI's former partner, Bruce Ivins, seems awfully similar, right down to the FBI never finding a single spore. The only conclusion that I can make is that we simply don't know who attacked the members of the media and 2 U.S. senators with anthrax in September and October of 2001. As far as I'm concerned, the terrorist is still out there. And I'm not the only person who thinks so. This is Senator Patrick Leahy, the Senate Judiciary Committee chairman, who is the target of one of the 2 deadliest anthrax letters. In this clip, he's speaking to Attorney General Robert Mueller right after the case was declared closed in September of 2008.
I should know, just so people understand, you have briefed me about the Ivins case. I understand I've read all the review and all that. If he is the one who sent the letter, I do not believe in any way, shape, or manner that he is the only person involved in this attack on Congress and the American people. I do not believe that at all. I believe there are others involved, either as accessories before or accessories after the fact. I believe that there are others out there. I believe there are others who can be charged with murder. Just want you to know how I feel about it. As one of the people who was aimed at in that attack.
And just so you don't think that this is some partisan thing, here's former Republican Senator Arlen Specter of Pennsylvania, who is also known as the inventor of the magic bullet theory.
I've looked over a good bit of the evidence on the anthrax case just to contrast prosecutors' opinions, and I have grave doubts about sufficiency of evidence for proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
So even Arlen Specter, the guy who defended the idea that a lone wolf shot a single bullet that turned in a bunch of different directions to kill JFK, that guy has grave doubts about the anthrax case. And a lot of my personal doubts come from the fact that at no time in the FBI's investigation did they seem to question why the second, more deadly attack was aimed at Tom Daschle and Patrick Leahy in particular. Because I think that's a very basic question. Why were the targets selected? Well, since the FBI didn't care really to look into it, I wanted to know if Senators Tom Daschle and Patrick Leahy had anything in common during that time. And guess what? They did. If you Google their names and 2001, you know what comes up? An article in the Washington Post by John Lancaster dated October 3rd, 2001, titled, quote, "Anti-Terrorism Bill Hits Snag on the Hill," unquote. The bill that headline refers to is the Patriot Act, and the 2 senators who caused the snag were Chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee Patrick Leahy, who had a problem with the wiretapping provisions, and Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle, who controlled the Senate schedule and said he wasn't going to bring the Patriot Act up for a vote as quickly as the Bush administration wanted. And remember, the Patriot Act. After the anthrax letter infected dozens in his office with anthrax, the Patriot Act passed so quickly that congressmen didn't even have the time to read it. Here's former Representative Ron Paul of Texas discussing what happened the day the Patriot Act was passed.
We looked real hard for that bill, and even while I was going to the floor, the staff still could not get it off the internet. So that in itself should have been a reason for everybody to vote against it. So there was not a full disclosure there. We had an idea that they were taking a reasonably bad bill and substituting a very bad bill, which was the Senate version. The House had actually cleaned up the Senate version to some degree, but they switched it at the last minute. We did not have it in front of us.
Speed was part of the strategy, and we've seen that strategy employed at least a half a dozen times since I started Congressional Dish. And before the anthrax attacks on his office, Tom Daschle intended to slow it down with the Patriot Act. So what a coincidence, another strange coincidence, that Senators Patrick Leahy and Tom Daschle, the 2 people who were making the Patriot Act difficult, were the 2 senators targeted for death by anthrax when the second set of envelopes were mailed, just 6 days after that article was published. You know, there's a lot of amazing coincidences in the anthrax story, coincidences that were never really investigated by the political appointees at the Justice Department. I think there were companies in the vaccine business that profited enormously off of the fear created by the attacks. And there were politicians with a demonstrated willingness to kill who used the fear caused by these attacks to pass the Patriot Act, which set up a global surveillance network like nothing the world has ever seen, and used it to start a war. I think a real investigation into the anthrax attacks was never really done because corporations and powerful politicians are politically suicidal to question. And I think that's the reason for the rush to declare case closed on a weak, circumstantial case against a dead man. I think a real investigation into the anthrax attacks is badly needed, and the only governmental body that can do it is the people's branch of government, Congress. But so many of us have forgotten that this ever even happened. We're not demanding an investigation, and until we do, we'll never get one. But there is something that we can do that I think is more politically possible. Because my second conclusion from this research is this. If there's anyone in the world making an anthrax attack more likely, it's the United States military, who is sending live anthrax all over the place and who, inconvenient fact here, was responsible for the anthrax that ended up in those letters. It was the Ames strain, the U.S. military developed strain. And regardless of who physically mailed those letters, the lack of supervision of the U.S. military's anthrax supplies is the reason it ended up in those envelopes. It's the only fact that we really have about those attacks. And now, the same U.S. military whose supply of anthrax ended up in the envelopes has been caught shipping live anthrax to almost 200 locations, foreign and domestic, over the course of the last 12 years. And we don't need to accept this, and there are things that can be done. The Government Accountability Office has some suggestions, and I think they're good ones. Here's Dr. Marcia Cross, Director of Healthcare at the Government Accountability Office once again.
As I stated at the outset, the incidents you are examining today are part of a long series of safety lapses. Since 2007, GAO has reported on these issues and has made multiple recommendations to improve federal oversight of high containment laboratories. The federal departments agreed with our recommendations and have conducted some activities to respond, but have not implemented our key recommendation to establish a single federal entity with responsibility for oversight of all high containment laboratories. We recommended the establishment of a single federal entity to, 1, conduct government-wide strategic planning for requirements for high containment laboratories, including assessments of their risks, and 2, develop national standards for designing, constructing, commissioning, operating, and maintaining such laboratories. We continue to believe that such an entity or some other mechanism to ensure higher level oversight is needed in the face of the continuing proliferation of high containment laboratories and the ongoing failures by agencies to fix their problems on their own.
So the Government Accountability Office suggests a single federal oversight body to assess risks at our labs and some national standards. That seems reasonable and doable. But what did Congress pass through the House of Representatives in July, the same month as that hearing? H.R. 1300, to allow expiring vaccines to go in first responders' arms. Is that good enough for you? If not, you have 3 representatives in Congress waiting for your call. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Congressional Dish, because Congressional Dish is brought to you by you. That's right. Pat yourself on the back. You're producing this podcast. And what I mean by that is that Congressional Dish is listener supported. And so instead of making you listen to advertisements in the beginning, middle, and end of the show for funding, Congressional Dish depends on you returning the value you receive from the show in some kind of financial form. It's the honor system here. Did you learn something new? Were you entertained? If so, please pay for the episode. Not because I'm forcing you to, because I'm not, but because you received something of value. To support the show, all you have to do is visit the support page at congressionaldish.com. There you will find links to PayPal, where you can contribute an amount of your choosing or subscribe to support the show on a monthly basis. You will also see the address for the Congressional Dish P.O. Box, where you can have your bank send checks to ensure that Congressional Dish gets every one of your pennies. And I say that because PayPal takes a 3% cut. And if you really can't spare a few dollars, we all have to buy things for ourselves. And so if you use Amazon.com and you enter that website through the search box on CongressionalDish.com, this show will get a commission on whatever you buy. No matter your income, there are ways for you to pitch in, and thank you for doing so. And thank you for helping me prove that the honor system can work. You give me hope every day. That said, though, I do have a fundraising goal of $5,000 a month, and I've announced that a few times on this show. And I recently, about 3 weeks ago, got an iTunes review that really upset me, to be honest, and it's still upsetting me, and it's been a few weeks, and so I'm going to address it on air, even though I usually don't talk about iTunes reviews. So I don't misrepresent his words. Here's what D-Jazz said. He said, quote, "I feel that the show has lost its original spark, and it now has too much personal opinion and constant requests for money. $5,000 per month needed to run a podcast? ? A real shame. It was my favorite podcast," unquote. So the show losing its original spark, I agree with you. That's why I'm changing things. But the fact that it's not your favorite anymore because I'm asking for $5,000 a month, that hurts. It really does. And the thing is that Jack Abramoff told us that when you call into Congress, the congressmen record each phone call as if it's 10 because they know a lot of people aren't going to speak up. And so I'm sitting here wondering how many other people are offended by the fact that I'm asking for $5,000 per month to run a podcast. So let me explain where that number came from as quickly as I can. $5,000 a month is $60,000 a year. And in my previous life, in my corporate life, when I had actual paychecks coming in, I worked for a property management company. I made it up to the assistant property manager. I hated it, which is why I stopped doing it, but I was very, very good at it. I never got less than 100% on my performance reviews. I was great at it. And so my fallback career is definitely property management. I know I can do it. I can get a job doing it tomorrow. And the average that a property manager makes is $65,000 a year. So at $5,000 a month, I'm asking for $5,000 a year less than what I'm worth. Okay? But here's the thing about making $60,000 a year. When I'm doing it to run a podcast, all of the expenses come out of my pocket. So what expenses am I talking about? Well, first, there was the equipment. The equipment, most of it's already paid for, but before I was making any money, I invested $3,000 to buy the equipment that I needed. But going forward on ongoing expenses, out of that $60,000 a year, I would be in the 25% tax bracket, which would be $15,000 a year that goes straight to Uncle Sam. So now we're already down to $45,000. Then there's the media hosting, which brings you the podcast, $240 a year. The free app for iTunes and Google Play, which is free for you, is not free for me. That costs $220 a year. The producer who is putting the show together is going to be at least $6,000 a year. And my virtual assistant for helping me grab all the links for all of these different bills, that's $1,000 a year. Then I also have to pay to host the website, and I have to upgrade that because there's now so many people looking at it that the website's super slow. And once I do that, it's going to be $360 a year. And on top of that, there's the domain name, so congressionaldish.com. I also own Congressional Dish TV and my own names. Those cost me about $100 a year. I also pay for really fast internet because with this career, I need really fast internet. That costs me $1,000 a year. The biggest expenses are definitely the podcasting conferences because that is my school. That's how I learned how to do this. There is no degree in podcasting. There used to be two. There was New Media Expo and there was Podcast Movement. Well, New Media Expo no longer seems to be a thing. So there's only one this year, which is Podcast Movement. It's going to be in downtown Chicago in July. I've already bought my ticket, but between the ticket, the flight, and the hotel and the food, I can do it for probably $1,500. On top of that, 2 weeks later, I'm going to go to Netroots Nation in St. Louis. Meet me there. It'd be super fun. But that's a political conference where I'm going to go and actually market this podcast because we need more listeners. And I think I can pull that off with the flight, hotel, and the ticket for $1,000. I also have to pay for the P.O. box, which is $132 a year. And when you add all of that up, this podcast costs me $26,000 a year in expenses. When you divide that up by month, that's almost $2,200 a month in expenses. And like I told you in the last episode, I can count on, through subscribers, $1,700 a month. Now, with the one-time contributions, I'm generally getting around $2,200 a month, which is why I keep saying that the podcast is breaking even. It's paying for itself. And it is, but it's not doing any more than that. And so, at $5,000 a month, what I'm looking for is a little extra. And the extra goes for a lot of things. I mean, 80% of the money you give me, you should know this, 80% of it goes into the Congressional Dish account. I pay myself 20% in labor. So at $5,000 a month, I would be making $12,000 a year, which I don't think is a crazy salary for a podcaster. In fact, the only way that it's crazy is that it's pretty crazy low. Honestly, this is a full-time job for $12,000 a year, but I'm saying that I am comfortable doing it at that rate. But the extra money, it goes in the Congressional Dish account for all of the other stuff that I have to buy that I can't really predict. So apps that come out that help me do the job better. So it's like there's an app that I bought that lets me tape my phone calls. That's how you're now able to hear me when I talk to my congressman. I also have to buy books and software, and I'd love to pay my guests. I have to pay for C-SPAN hearings, and I have to pay to travel to go to appearances. So when I go on the Mike Herrera Hour, I pay to go to Seattle. And when I go and I talk to Cara Santa Maria, I pay to go to Los Angeles. And hopefully someday Joe Rogan will come calling. Well, he's in Los Angeles, along with Duncan Trussell, who I'd love to talk to. I'd love to talk to Sam Cedar. I mean, there's so many different podcasters that I know you're reaching out to. And if they ever email me and want me in person, I need money sitting aside so that I can go and do this and help grow this show. But then there's also other stuff, printer, ink, computer repairs. 80% of the money you give me goes to the Congressional Dish account and goes directly towards the podcast. And so that's why I want $5,000 a month. Okay? Okay. All right. So before I get into thanking the people who are helping me get to that $5,000 a month goal, I do want to remind you guys that there's an election coming up this Tuesday on November 3rd. And it's an off-year election, so not everybody has things to vote for. But in Kentucky, Louisiana, and Mississippi, you guys have to vote for your governor. And then there's also votes for your people in your state congresses in Louisiana, Mississippi, New Jersey, and Virginia. So if you're in those states, please vote. But then there's also a lot of us who have local offices that are up for election. So please check and see if you have something to vote for this year. These are the elections that nobody goes to, so your vote counts more than any other time if you show up. All right, so thank yous. First and foremost, I would like to thank my dad and Robin, my stepmother, because they did my taxes. And obviously we did our taxes really, really late. But the reason is that last year, Joe and I earned money in Massachusetts, Oregon, and California. So our taxes were a big old mess. Luckily though, Dad and Robin are both accountants, and so they took care of that for me and saved me hours and hours of stress and probably failure, because I don't know how I would have handled that. So thank you so much, Dad and Robin. I love you both very, very much. Okay, so Congressional Dish contributors. We have had a shakeup in the Congressional Dish arms race, a big one. Unfortunately, we did lose a few subscribers. One was on purpose. One was dropped by PayPal. I don't really know. I don't really know what the backstory is on that. I figured there would be some losses, and there were after my announcement. But that means that there are opportunities in the Congressional Dish arms race. And for those of you who don't know, this is the top subscribers, the people who are chipping in the most per month. This race was launched by Mark Boyd and has continued now for a couple of years. And the person in the gold position right now is still Chris Simpson with his $104.69 per month. In the silver position, we now have Jeff and Brian Serco, who are contributing $67.87 with paper checks, and that's a raise. So thank you so much, guys, and welcome to the silver podium. That's the word I'm looking for. And then back on the bronze podium is Ken Nagel with his $51.80. And so if you would like to bump anyone off, the going rate is now $51.81 to get yourself on the podium. Thank you so much, guys, for competing. And right now it's all guys. So ladies, you want to get in on the game? Because right now everyone is a male up on the podiums. So speaking of ladies, though, our biggest new subscriber is Michelle Greer. She is now contributing $50 a month. Thank you so much, Michelle. You made a huge, huge difference. We also are getting $25 a month from Justin Hurdle, and Justin increased his subscription. So he was chipping in $15, now it's $25, and he did this right after I made the announcement that I'm changing up the format. And actually, while we're at it, Michael Alfasi did the same thing. He was chipping in $5.15 per month. He gave me double that now and he's chipping in $10.30. So he doubled what he's chipping in and did it the day after I made that announcement. You guys need to know that I was so anxious that morning when I opened my email, and there was one cancellation, but then there was also 2 raises. So Justin and Michael, thank you so much. You made me feel so much better that morning. You have no idea. We also have Josh Amari, who's chipping in $20 a month and left me a message. He said, Jen, shout out from Austin, Texas. Been binge listening for a while, almost caught up. Thanks so much. You care about what you do, and it shines in through your podcast. I'm in to help you hit that $5,000, Josh. P.S. Tell your listeners I'm a 24-year-old student working at a pizza place. If I can pitch in, anyone can, unquote. Thank you, Josh. I really appreciate you helping me get to that $5,000 a month goal. And I want to come to Austin. I may have told you this in an email, but I am looking at coming to Austin in either March or April. And if I do, I want pizza. So let me know where you work and I'll come visit. Let's see. We also got $10 and $22 a month now from James Wigder. And I'm really happy to see this because James actually subscribed a while ago and had to cancel. And it was because something was going on in his family. And the fact that he's back means that things are better now. So not only am I happy to obviously have the support, but it means things are better for James. So yay, James. We are now also getting $10 a month from each Tonda Perkins, Philip Kaiser, and Noel Hutton. Thank you so much for your contribution. We are also getting $5.15 a month from both Alexander Beatty and Elias Yiannopoulos. And the $5.15 a month contribution is now becoming a thing. And I think that's so nice of you because what it is, the extra 15 cents covers the cut that PayPal takes. That's why they're doing $5.15. That's really thoughtful of you. Thank you so much for subscribing at that amount. And then we also are getting $5 a month from all of these people. Keith Warzeniak, I'm going to go with that. William Warren, Stephen Davenport, and Leslie Behan. And Leslie left a note. She said, "Hi, Jen. You are providing an invaluable service, which I appreciate greatly, despite being so angry at Congress when I listen. You were mentioned or were a guest on one of the other podcasts I listened to, The Majority Report with Sam Cedar, Best of the Left, or The David Pakman Show. I'm so glad I found you. You are now the fourth podcast I support with small, though regular donations. If everyone chipped in a little, you'd rest easier at night, I'm sure." Yeah, you know it, girl. I've listened to only about 3 or 4 episodes so far. One suggestion is to mention the party affiliation of the bill sponsor who gets big donations from whatever corporation is affected by the legislation. My guess is Republican most of the time, but I'm sure Democrats are bought often too, unquote. So yes, here's what's going on with the 114th Congress. One of the reasons that I don't list the party is because it's almost always Republican because they control both the House and the Senate. So unless I say otherwise, just assume it's a Republican because most of the time it is. They don't let the Democratic bills come up for a vote. But the other reason that I don't do that is when I do list the party next to the person, people's like partisan, like whatever that is that makes people all angry and team-like, it comes out and I get these emails where people are like, "You're picking on Republicans." And it's like, no, they're writing the bills. But I just don't want to be saying the names of the parties over and over and over again because it just makes people upset. And I can't explain what that is, but that's part of it. And then the other part of it is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they're Democrats or Republican. You shouldn't be voting by party. You should be voting based on the person. So I think it's far more important to know where that person is representing because the only thing that matters is the people in that district. You are the only people that have the power to fire that person for the bills that they're writing. So it's far more important to know that this person is representing Texas or California or Rhode Island or whatever, because that means that person might be your representative and you should check that out. It doesn't matter if they're Democrats or Republicans. It matters if they're your representative or not. So that's why I do that. And also, you probably heard me on the David Pakman Show. I'm kind of a regular on David's show now. I love talking to him. And then I've been on Best of the Left before, but it's been a while. I haven't heard about it for a bit. But if you like to hear the show on Best of the Left, if you think there's a small clip, usually under like 3 to 4 minutes, send it to Jay. Make his life easier. And that's definitely something that you can do as a member of the Congressional Dish marketing department because he definitely uses the clips that are just provided for him. And if you ever have any questions on like how to physically do that, I can definitely help you out. Just send me an email if you're willing to do that. I mean, that would be amazing. Let's see. We also have 2 more subscribers. We're getting $2 a month each from Leanne Parker and Ryan Barrett. Thank you so much for helping out. There's some good news, bad news here with the subscriber level. Because we lost some subscribers, both to, purposeful cancellations and just PayPal dropping people, which happens. We are now making in subscriptions 45 cents less per month this month than we were before. So despite all those people signing up, they pretty much just covered the people that are no longer chipping in. So kind of hurts a little, but I still have faith that this will work. But if you liked this episode not having the, hey, Congressional Dish is listener supported in the beginning of the episode, if you want me to keep that going, this would be a really good time to contribute, because my nervousness is just that much higher now because I'm a little bit less than breaking even from this month to last month. But that said, we did have one-time contributions that helped out big time. So we got $120 from Bruce Marcus of Austin, Texas, Austin again. And he said, he left a message. He said, quote, Jen, I wanted to thank you for all of your hard work. The work you do is so important. You are doing what the news media should be doing. I've only listened to a couple of episodes so far, but I'm so impressed, and I sent a little money to help with your goal. I hope you can reach it soon. Good luck and God bless. Thanks again, Bruce Marcus, unquote. Thank you very much, Bruce. And I just want to note here that we now have people who are chipping in who have only listened to a couple of episodes. And that means so much to me. Thank you so much. And because I know that there's people that have listened since the very beginning who haven't pitched in a dime. So it means a lot to me that you're willing to chip in so soon after discovering the podcast. Thank you so much. We also got $52 from Brent Ponto of Bellevue, Washington. And Brent had a problem with PayPal. And so I just want to remind you guys that the P.O. Box is a really good option. It's just as easy. You just have to sign on to your online banking and send the checks that way. So you're basically doing it the same way. It's all online. And as far as the P.O. Box is concerned, I did find a P.O. Box closer to me than Oakland. So I'm going to be changing the address. It's still the Oakland address right now, but I'm going after I finish this recording to get the new one here in Walnut Creek. So starting in November, there will be a new address. And so I'll let you know when that's actually done next week, and I'll give you the address. But the people who are sending physical checks, I'm going to have you change the address sometime in the next year, because I will have mail forwarding, but the sooner the better. Obviously, just get it done. Let's see. We also got $50 on PayPal from each William Brooks, Jeffrey Love, and Bob Wilkerson. And poor William Brooks, you're the person who gets screwed by me skipping the music in the middle of the podcast, because William just sent me his whole album. So, William, I might just throw your music in here someday because I like it, because I do like it. But yeah, thanks for pitching in the $50 and for giving me your album once again. Yeah, you're awesome. We also got $25 a month from Derek Collar of Peoria, Arizona, and $25 from Leah Liston of Bethesda, Maryland. Thank you. We also got $20 from each Daniel W. Ferguson, from Joe Morales, from Davey McNaughton, again, of Ontario, Canada. This is his 5th contribution. And we also got $20 from Charles Clifford, who left a note. He said, "Hi, Jen. I just sent you a little moolah. It's not much. I'm very broke. I'm an old student with a kiddo on the way. Congratulations. It's not what I'd like to give, but it's what's possible now. Charles, every bit helps. So thank you." Back to Charles. "When I'm out, I'll definitely chip in a bit more, or when I can along the way. Until then, though, I want you to know how much your show means to me. I literally believe it's one of the most important productions out there in any medium, seriously. You're doing us a huge solid by digging through all of the bull to tell it to us straight. I really don't think that there's anywhere else that does a good job at giving such a clear picture of how jacked up our government is. Anyway, I hope this finds you well, and I hope the new format works out nicely for you. Best regards, Charlie. P.S. I don't think you shouldn't ask for support. Maybe put it at the end, or at least mention it in the beginning. You need to get paid." Unquote. Like you saw, I'm putting it right in the middle. So in between the meat of the episode and the thank you section, and we'll see how it works from there. I'm super nervous about not doing it in the beginning, because I've been told that that's an important place to put it, but we'll see. If support picks up, then I can keep it, the way it is. Yeah, we'll see. But thank you for your help, Charlie. I appreciate it. We also got $12 in Bitcoin from Jeffrey Peachy. Thank you, Jeff. And $10 from an anonymous donor from Scottsdale, Arizona. We got $10 from David Haddock, his 2nd contribution, and $10 from William Colson. Thank you so much. We also got $10 in Bitcoin through Change Tip on Twitter from Michael Johnson. He always gives me these Change Tip amounts. But when I went and looked, I actually had $95 in Bitcoin just sitting there. So thanks not only for the $10 in Bitcoin, Michael, but for letting me know that I had money sitting there. That was a nice surprise. We also got $5 from Michael Zachary of Chula Vista, California, his 3rd contribution. And then finally, our last PayPal contributor was $2 from Sarah McNutt. Thank you very much, Sarah. All right. And then finally, paper checks. Okay, so we got... That's right. We got an additional $30 from new subscriber Alexander Beatty. And he wrote me a note. He said, "Dear Jen, you rock. Your show is awesome. So I'm finally contributing $5.15 on a monthly basis. At least I feel like I'm making a difference. But I knew I could do more by being politically active. It's just that when I start delving into your show, I get really stressed out thinking about all of the evil shit going on in Congress and the governmental organizations and the TPP. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but sometimes hearing all the bad news makes me feel impotent." I'm going to stop you right there for a second. I hate that. I'm not trying to be the most depressing podcast in the universe. I honestly think that things will get better, especially if we do start being politically active. That's what I can tell you. I wouldn't keep doing this if it was depressing me. It's not depressing me. It makes me feel more powerful to know what's going on so that I can do something about it. And I think that's the better way to look at it. You know, you can actually write to your congressman right now about the TPP. You can do something about it. And it's because you know about it. You know what I mean? So look at it that way. Don't feel impotent, because you're not. You're impotent if you don't even know that it's happening. If you're like, TPP, what the hell's the TPP? That person's impotent. You're not, okay? Back to Alex. He said, "I guess it should fuel me to get active and use my Congress's hotline as an outlet." Yes, exactly. Which I have done before. Good. It doesn't help when I try to talk to my dad about your show, and he agrees with me on most of it, but on other stuff like episode 76, I don't remember which one that was, he doesn't believe me or thinks that I'm worrying too much. However, when it came to the TPP, he admitted I was right about that being bad after all, but I don't want to be glad about that. Anyway, good luck with the show, and use this money to hire someone to help you. Alex Beatty. Alex, I am using your money to help with the show. Having a producer and having Bryce help me with the links is huge. So thank you. You are definitely helping make that possible. And just some baby boomers are tough to talk to. Don't try and change them. Just try and outvote them. That's the only advice I have for you. All right. So physical checks. Like I said, we did get an increased subscription from Brian and Jeffrey Circo. And I know I already thank you too, but I want to thank you again because that was a very nice surprise. We also got a check for $50, 50 burger. My husband hates it when I say that. $50 from Chris Redinger, and he says, "Thanks for doing what you do. It's usually a mix of nauseating, infuriating, and depressing when I hear what Congress is up to, but it's invaluable to know. And Lord knows I certainly don't have the patience or time to read that stuff myself, Chris." Again, not trying to depress you. Don't be depressed. Just be active. That's all I can really tell you. We also got $30 from Patrick Cardone. I recognize that name. He has chipped in before. And he left a note. He said, "Sorry, I haven't sent you a regular check in a few months. Shit got crazy in my life, and then I lost my checkbook. But I found it now, and all is well. I should be all caught up now. Keep up the great work, Patrick." I'm glad you found your checkbook. Thanks, Patrick. And let's see. We also got $24 from Robin Dumke. Thank you very much. That's from Minnesota. Thank you. Here is another contribution from Ashley Hulst. This one for $20. And she wrote monthly donation on this, so that's pretty cool. She said, "Thank you for everything you're doing. I don't mind the golf swing, by the way. Have a great day." Ashley, thanks for letting me know that. I think I love the golf swing, to tell you the truth. I think it's funny. So I'm glad you guys like it too. We got $20 from Kevin Moore. Thank you, Kevin. And this is on top of the people who are contributing monthly from from physical checks. Sorry, I'm stuttering all over the place. But let's see. We got $10 from Craig Brown. He's a new contributor from Burlington, Vermont. We have, Dan Chiserick, thank you. Jim DeBow. So many of these are subscribers. I just love it so much. We also got $10 from Hosea Sell, and he left me an email which said, "Hello, love the podcast, just started listening. I threw the question out there on Dan Carlin's Common Sense Facebook fan page. What are other great podcasts to listen to? And your show got a lot of recommendations. Keep up the fight. P.S. You should have a link for donations on your app." Okay, two things about that. First of all, Congressional Dish Marketing Department, whoever went on Dan Carlin's Common Sense Facebook page and said that Congressional Dish is a great podcast to listen to, thank you. That was effective. And this was proof. We not only had a new listener, but he chipped in $10. So whatever you're doing by spreading the word, it's working. Thank you. And I do have a donations link on the app. The deal with the app is that the app is run by Libsyn, so I can't really control like how it's functioned. So there's no button for donations, but in every one of the show notes, it starts out with the links to how you can contribute. So go into the show notes, and that's how you can contribute straight from the free Congressional Dish app, okay? Thank you very much. I don't know why I'm doing a Pee Wee Herman voice. I think I'm just tired and crazy. We have $10 here from Miranda Wagner. Thank you. $6 from Seth Conley. Pretty sure that's a subscription, but I'll thank you again anyway. And then, this letter. I love this letter. So this is from Bud Johnson. Bud Johnson has been sending in a bunch of $5 checks, always with a handwritten note. But this one is different. This note was on a printer, his new printer. And he said, "Hey Jen, Congressional Dish, thanks for CD103. You need 8 to 12 people to take your bill analysis into small sections and start hounding the people and these loose cannon legislators to give it up and get a grip. The point I will give on this one is how people will ignore the reality of the Guantanamo Bay closing issue and play right into the politicians' hands by making it a partisan issue. It is a humanity issue corrupted by bogus partisan legislators, playing games that affected human lives for 14 years now." But I could not agree anymore. But here's the problem. Even if we close down Guantanamo, the only suggestions that anybody has for those people who have been pretty much proven innocent but are still stuck there, the only suggestions are bringing them to another prison to be held indefinitely here in the United States. So it's just moving people from one indefinite detention facility to another. The problem isn't necessarily Guantanamo Bay itself. The problem is indefinite detention. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I'm just saying. Back to Bud's letter. He has a whole bunch of symbols here, and he says that that's his self-censored commentary because the language is too awful to type in here. He's clearly mad. But he says, "We love you and your family. Thank you. Here's my nominal contribution, and my one curse word goes to the following. Fuck Mitch McConnell." I'm going to leave that one up to you. That's from Carl Bud Johnson. He said, "P.S. I got a printer, and I'm super excited about that. I love your longer notes." And he said, "P.P.S. Great show. I think your format and use of props is perfect." But I'm sorry I just changed the format on you, but I hope you like this one too. But yeah, thank you so much for chipping in. All right, we got $5 from Craig Brown in Vermont. But Craig, this was sent to the wrong P.O. box. Now, you have to change the address anyway next week once I get the Walnut Creek address. But the nice people at the Association of Bay Area Governments sent me your check. They mailed it to me, which was super nice of them to do. But the P.O. box it's different. It's 10902 is the actual P.O. box address. So thank you for the $5, and just please know that was the wrong address. And then we also got $5 from Chadwick Vandarius, and Chadwick also did a YouTube video. So he took one of the bills that I did in June and did a YouTube video. And so there's actually something on the Congressional Dish YouTube page. And Chad and listener David, they're both interested in doing YouTube videos of the podcast episodes. And so go ahead and sign up for the YouTube subscription, because it looks like we have a chance of it actually being used before I actually get a chance to use it myself. So thank you, Chad, and thank you, David, for making YouTube videos. Hopefully that works out in the future, because I really like the one that Chad did. And then last is a doubloon. I love my monthly doubloons from Rod Collins. And he left a note: "As promised, another ounce of silver as my contribution towards the show. Love the continuous onslaught of the holy shit moments that I get from listening to your show. Keep up the good work. By the way, put me down as in favor of the golf swing. I do think it adds something to the show, Rod Collins." So lots of golf swing supporters and another doubloon. That's pretty awesome. And then last, did get a couple of gifts. One of them is from Sharuk Arif, and he gave me printer ink. I always need printer ink. I think it's the one thing still on the wish list, and he hooked me up. I can never get enough printer ink. So thank you so much for sending me that. And then, okay. And then there were also 2 books. One of them was from Luis, who left a note. The book he sent was The Pentagon Wars by James Burton. And it says, I hope this reaches you in time to be relevant for Congressional Dish. At any rate, it's a fantastic read. I know you have a very full plate of reading and research material, but you should read this and want to know more about the Boyd and the Fighter Mafia. I recommend the book Boyd, the Fighter Pilot Who Has Changed the Art of War by Robert Coram. So that's not the book he sent me. He sent me The Pentagon Wars, which I will be looking into, I promise, this year. I'm not going to let this not happen, especially with a new format. I will look into whatever gets authorized for the Defense Department this year, and I do think this book will come in very handy. So thank you so much for sending me that. And then along the same lines, I was sent the book The Pentagon's New Map by Thomas Barnett. This was sent to me by John, and John says, I'm about halfway through this book, and I think it explains our goal of global security through globalization. Many of our government's decisions that seem crazy make sense in this context. Very relevant to your country of origin labeling episode, the World Trade Organization, and TPP. John, I've actually read this book and I've used it as a reference so many times, and you're absolutely right. This is one of the best books I've ever read for understanding what's going on, like, globally, why it matters that the economic laws all match. Like, this is one of the best books to read in that capacity. It's called The Pentagon's New Map. It's available in the Congressional Dish store. That's where you can find it. And then, of course, Congressional Dish gets a commission when you buy it that way. The only thing I caution people about when reading it is that Thomas Barnett is an asshole. I really don't like him as a person, and I found him insufferable. But the stuff that he says in here, it makes perfect sense. And I know that people that make decisions read this book. How do I know that? Because on the inside flap and on the back cover is a quote from Representative Mac Thornberry, who is now the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. The chairman has read this book, and it really, big picture wise, it's just as important as The Shock Doctrine and Confessions of an Economic Hitman. So thank you for sending me this. Even though I've already read it, I actually have a friend that I want to read this, and I never let anybody read my copy because I want to make sure I get it back. So this will not go unread. Thank you so much, John. And yeah, thanks for sending me books. I now have 11 books on my shelf that I have to read. And that's another reason for the new format, because I want to be able to read this stuff and do episodes about what's in these books, because there's such good information in book form. So yeah. All right. That's it for thank yous. Thank you all for contributing. The next episode is going to be about CISA. I just made that decision because it passed the House, or it passed the Senate. So we now have 2 cybersecurity bills that have passed the House. I hate those bills. And then the one that's in the Senate that the Electronic Frontier Foundation and all these people on the internet have been freaking out about. It just passed the Senate. So we need to know what's in it. And I will have that ready for you next Sunday. Till then, have a great week, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, in the end they'll justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it lies, but we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but we're not keeping quiet
these bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually